Good afternoon, everybody. This is Meredith Lego. And first of all, I just wanted to say happy holidays to everybody. This video should be posting, I think, on Christmas. And I wish from the bottom of my heart that everybody has a wonderful, high frequency day and weekend, and that leads into a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful new year. And I wish you the best and highest good. So in this particular video, I'm going to be talking about an experience that I had along my journey of having, I guess you could say, higher sensory perceptions start to turn on in my own awakening or expanding of consciousness. And I'm going to talk about an experience that ties to some recent news that came out within the last week. And it has to do with the assassination of JFK. So if you're familiar with the news, or if you kind of watch that, I don't watch it in depth, but I listen to it because others in the household listen to it. So it's kind of on in the background. Basically, the papers kind of concerning the assassination of JFK were released, and it became transparent. And again, I'm going by researchers of the information that was released. I have not personally read the information that was released, but it did imply that the CIA was heavily involved in the assassination of JFK. Whether that's true or not, from a physical reality perspective, I don't have a point of view. But I do want to share something that I did experience around that particular event. So back in, I think it was 2018 or so, I was meditating early in the morning. And in this particular scenario, I had the unique experience, and it doesn't happen every day by any means, but I had the unique experience of going basically what's called out of body. So in this particular scenario, you actually can program yourself to do this. So that's a little tip or trick. But I essentially found my consciousness going up and out of body. So it's almost like you feel yourself lifting up out of your body, and you can actually turn around and see your physical body laying there on the bed. Oftentimes when this happens, especially when it started happening in the beginning, it can be a little unraveling because you know that your physical body can't move, but you're starting to experience movement, almost like I have to imagine it's like being in a virtual reality headset. That's what it's like. So you don't necessarily have the body with you, but you are maneuvering around, or your consciousness is moving around what seems like your physical reality. And so this essentially happened to me. And I found myself actually going up into almost what I would describe as being a wormhole, although I later learned that it's called the ambient tunnel. And what caused me to have this experience is that the night before, I was basically working on this just as an exercise, and I programmed my consciousness. And you do this almost in a hypnotic state, but you sort of program yourself to have this sort of an experience. And I specifically was interested in seeing or being able to travel to points in time from a remote viewing perspective that had major influences in the shifts of our timeline. So that's what I wanted to see. So the next morning I started to experience, and it wasn't a surprise because I had pretty much, worked on trying to achieve that particular state. I went out of my body, and I found myself going through a very hazy veil, I guess you could say. It's like I popped through a veil, almost like a firmament. The only way that I just can describe it is it seemed like, maybe in dance clubs or, the Halloween contraptions that produce smoke or fog. It seemed like I was lifting up through fog, only there was kind of like strobe lighting going through it as well, kind of like a frequency strobe lighting. So I found my consciousness lifting up through this hazy fog. And on the other side, as soon as I got through it, I was immediately sucked into a wormhole. That's what, it felt like. I later learned again that it was called the ambient tunnel. And as I was going through the tunnel, you go super, super hyper fast. It's kind of like what it seems like in the movies, where you're traveling long distances very, very fast. But I found myself noticing that on the side of the tunnel, there looked like there were different windows or different doors, if you will. And so I ended up not wanting to go down a particular door, but my consciousness just started going through one of these windows. And I didn't necessarily have any place or location in mind to go to on this particular experience, although there have been other out-of-body experiences where if you think of going to a particular spot, you will go there instantaneously, and you can go vast distances instantaneously. But in this particular case, I didn't have, a spot in mind. I was just sort of interested in seeing or understanding particular times that influenced the timeline. As I was coming through the window, or I guess you could say popping through the window, I felt my consciousness floating down, if you will. And before I necessarily saw anything in the kind of world around me, I actually started to hear information first. So I started to hear music that to me seemed to be like 60s music, early 60s. I also almost kind of reminded me like of Flower Power, but kind of like the rock bands that would have been, kind of in the 60s. And then I also heard a speech that was being given by JFK. And it wasn't a speech that I had particularly knew, he's got some famous speeches that always get perhaps played on TV or on the radio from time to time. It wasn't one that would be familiar, but it was a speech that was, clearly his voice. And at that time when the speech ended, so it was almost like I was listening to a radio station, but in the past. I found myself in a street corner early in the morning of some town in the United States. I didn't know where, but it was like the crack of dawn. And I was standing at the corner of two streets, and I was at a gas station. So specifically, there was a 76 ball. It looked like it was, kind of run down, as in, I didn't necessarily know what time it was, but it didn't certainly seem like it was modern day America. And there were much older cars that are around me. And one car that I found to be particularly odd was what I later had to trace back later in the day as I was researching my experience, was a Nova car. And it was like olive green, those kind of like god-awful colors of olive green that you would see on refrigerators and on appliances back in the late 60s, early 70s. So that was the color of that car. And it was pretty empty, but I did notice some elements of the town that were Dallas. And I know that because I've traveled there just for work or for personal, but I somehow knew from the buildings kind of around me that I was in Dallas. That's all I can say. And as soon as somehow it hit me that the JFK assassination was a very key change in the timeline, and that it was intentional. And as soon as I had that thought, I immediately snapped back into my body. It was instantaneous. And I reflected a long time, I guess you could say throughout the rest of the day, on that experience. I was trying to, understand it. I was trying to remember the bands that I was hearing. So, I spent some time looking up the music, kind of trying to remember it, piece it together in terms of my understanding of time, when they came out or when they were released. I looked up the car that I saw, and I realized that it had been produced, I think, in 19 62 or 63, something like that. And then later that day or that night, I realized that the day was it was the anniversary of the JFK assassination. So I can't remember the exact day that he was assassinated, but I know it was in November. And the day that I had that experience was 55 days or 55 years to the day of the JFK assassination. So it's a very key, I guess you could say, energetically charged hot point, or hot point in the timeline, if you will. And I intersected with it during that experience. But what I found interesting when I was reflecting on the whole experience I had is the knowing deep down that it was an intentional event that had a major change or rebranching for our timeline. It was like a key event. And so I know, we're in periods of time that I think will later be referred to as timeline wars and as frequency wars. And this particular event was like a crucial, quote unquote, battle within the timeline war. So I thought it was interesting that, something that most of us probably intuitively felt something wasn't quite right about that whole experience. Like I somehow knew why I was brought to that particular event with the intention of just trying to understand what events changed the timeline. Sure enough, I showed up on that day, the day of the JFK assassination in Dallas. So I went back in time to that day. If I didn't make that clear, my consciousness traveled back in time to the day of the JFK assassination in Dallas, but it was really early in the morning, but probably before everything got going. And so I think it's important for us to at least understand and reflect that there are definitely forces at play, I guess you could say, that we just have to be aware of, within humanity, to make sure that we're not being played, if you will. And I guess you could say, turning on of higher sensory perceptions allows us to see sort of beyond the veil. I guess you could say it's not even beyond the veil of, let's say, things that we normally can't see with our five senses, but beyond the veil of truths that may not be told to us. So this is the opportunity where we have to really feel into what feels right, and discern, what information is being presented to us with our ears, with our eyes, even what we hear on the news. And this is kind of a great example of making sure that we're not just, always buying into what we're being told on the news. So this is where your cellular telepathy skills start to come into play. So with that, again, I just wanted to share that because, again, it popped up this week in the news, and I had the interesting experience of having been able to travel back in time to the day of the JFK assassination and sort of not be there witnessing it, but at least being there in Dallas on the day that it happened, exactly 55 days, 55 years, I guess you could say, from the anniversary date perspective of when it happened, and then be able to kind of piece together that was a significant shift in our timeline. So again, just wish everybody the absolute best holiday, and peace and compassion in your life going forward into the new year. Thanks a lot. Bye.